Sitting on top of a file in my office is a fading photograph of myself as a squirming 1-year-old held in the arms of my homely, middle-aged cousin Bella. We're in front of the Bronx apartment house where we live. The year is 1933. The place, a red brick, 2-story colonial building with a wide expanse of lawn that covered half the city block. Later, I was to learn that our rented house was the house that Dutch Schultz built, his unused retreat from gangland killings. My parents rented the house from an ad in the Bronx Home News, unaware at the time of the real owner. It was part of their effort to secure us against the dangers of the world outside. And danger lurked everywhere. Cousin Bella had come to visit us from her tenement apartment on Rivington Street on the Lower East Side. She would arrive with needle, thread, scissors, and bolts of flowered chintz to make the ill-fitting slipcovers that would cover the rose brocade of our Sheraton-style living room. It was her belief that everything in life and furniture should be concealed. Some parts of her story came to me through my mother's childhood recollections that I trusted implicitly, since Mother, all her virtues and charm, had no imagination. Other parts of the story come from Cousin Bella's own account during our last meeting in the early 1970s, shortly before her death. Bella was no grandmother figure, this homely, tobacco-stained woman with the iron gray bun who looked years older than her age and who treated my sister and me as conspirators in a plot we could not fathom. Alone together, as I watched Bella cut fabrics and take measurements, she was the first and only one to let me strike a match from a small wooden box she carried in her large black handbag, so that my excited hands could light her cigarette. The first match you strike is one of life's transforming moments. One has made fire and survived. Once, a few years later, she took me to the local movie theater. We sat upstairs in the smoking balcony. She offered me, a 10-year-old, a drag on her cigarette. Since we both had suffered from asthma, she assured me that cigarettes could open up the bronchial tube, and that her perpetual coughing was a sign that she was clearing out her lungs. Now that I was a grown man, Cousin Bella was ready to tell me her story, to be relieved of its awful burden of deceit, obsession, passion, and disillusion, a burden that she carried with her for over 80 years. She held out a large yellow pad and a freshly sharpened pencil and advised me to take notes so that you don't forget all about me later. I never forgot.
Bella Bush was my maternal grandmother's niece. She was born outside of Minsk in Belarus, Russia, to Yetta Bush and my grandmother's older brother, Abraham. Bella's mother had died of typhus at the turn of the century, and Abram, Bella's father, quickly remarried to find a cook for his home and a mother for his daughter, choosing another Yetta in the hope that the second Yetta would prove as loving as the first. The new Yetta never took to the girl. But as long as her husband lived, she concealed her antipathy for the child, and she treated Bella with a cold but proper civility. She fed her, she clothed her, and she slapped her as required by the unwritten laws of stepmotherhood. Bella was 15 when her father died, and the girl was now in the sole charge of that forbidding Yetta, who dropped all pretense of caring for the child and openly revealed her implacable hatred for her. She searched for a way to rid herself of this homely, hungry, burdensome creature who ate the leftovers that might have been used for the next day's meal. Yetta spoke to the local matchmakers, but they demanded a substantial fee for finding a mate for such a plain girl with no dowry. You need a blind widower, one stated. Don't come off so often. The stepmother reproached the girl for her ugliness, claiming that it was a deliberate act of spite that every day Bella contrived to grow more ugly. Your mother, poor soul, she really died by looking at you. And I'm not going to let you do me in, no, Bella Bush. You will not kill me before my time. Now, less than a year after Bella's father Abram's death, Yetta sold her charge to Anna Molotnikov, the local madam in Minsk, whose spacious wooden house sheltered a dozen women who served the pressing sexual needs of the local Cossacks and the town's bachelor Jews. Yetta would claim that she had merely placed Bella in the brothel as a maid. Who would believe that one would end up as a whore? Uglier they don't get, who knew? Well, in time somebody did, and that somebody was my maternal grandmother, Sarah. Now, my grandmother, Sarah Bush Horowitz, was a small woman with a hard, bony face and the blazing black eyes of the religious fanatic or the tubercular. She was indeed both tubercular and a fanatic, but her fanaticism was all in the service of her family. She had already given birth to 4 children. The oldest was Sam, the youngest Libby, later to be my mother. Sarah was waiting to join her husband, who'd settled in New York and was working to make the passage money to send for his family, but he had not been very fortunate in the new world, where he worked a pushcart among thousands of others selling needles and threads and notions on Essex Street, occasionally picking up day jobs, painting, welding rivets, and repairing the Brooklyn Bridge. His sister, Maryasha, the first to immigrate, had promised to provide the passage money for his family when her dressmaking business was established, a pledge that she would keep in time. Now, Grandmother Sarah lived in a village bordering the larger town of Minsk, and when she visited Minsk to make a delivery for the home-based upholstery business, she decided to visit her niece Bella at the Soloway cabin on the other side of town. A nervous Yetta Soloway told my grandmother that young Bella had been sent off to America to work as a seamstress months before. My grandmother was at once suspicious. Surely Bella would have come to say goodbye to her only living blood relative. News of Bella's true whereabouts, however, came to Sarah from a friend in Minsk when Sarah mentioned to her that little Bella was in New York. New York? Are you crazy? She's working as a whore in a brothel in Minsk. Sarah approached Yetta Soloway again, who repeated her now well-rehearsed speech about sending little Bella off to America, and she was happily engaged sewing buttons in a blouse factory. But when Sarah asked to be shown some proof of his claim, such as a letter from Bella in America, Yetta replied, the child is a terrible ingrate. She's disappeared into America. I suppose we'll never hear from her again. But other neighbors confirmed the story of Bella's downfall, and my grandmother was determined to save her niece. So that very day, Sarah went calling at the only brothel in town. Dressed in her sober black high holidays coat, with the indeterminate fur collar, the small garnet pin on the lapel set in pinchbeck gold, a gift from her husband in better days. Sarah carried a large, polished, rosewood walking stick with the ivory handle inherited from her own mother, who had been lame, and she leaned on it in the manner of her invalid mother. Indeed, she seemed possessed by the very spirit of that iron-willed lady, a kindness alloyed with unpolished steel, the formula of which was known only to Jewish women of that generation. Sarah waited outside the brothel for a moment, shaping her strategy. It was early afternoon now, a slow time at the brothel when most of the whores were resting, reading, playing card games. This was the time when Sarah felt she could best rescue the girl, and she tugged at the heavy, twisted rope that held the cowbell door chimes, and the front door was opened by Anna Bolotnikov herself, a large, stout, amiable woman, a model professional. My grandmother asked at once for Bella Bush, her niece. There is no one here by that name. And she turned to the whores and she said, do we have a Bella here? And everybody shook their head. But Grandmother Sarah was not ready to accept defeat. Girls often change their names when they come to work for you, don't they? Perhaps she's here under another name. Well, I would know if that was so, the madam replied. I have to register my girls with the prefect of police. They have to show their health certificates. If this Bella of yours was here, I would certainly know. I would like to see all your employees, my grandmother said. You can't send me away without the assurance that my niece is not among them. I can't leave and face the ghost of my poor dead brother until you do this. You'll go away peacefully if I do this? I just want to know that the child is well. So the madam calls into the kitchen. A few of the local Russian girls parade into the parlor with their high, broad cheekbones powdered and rouged, a few with their full breasts exposed to view through her sheer, open blouses, and at the end of the line, there was Cousin Bella, looking frightened and frightful, in a red wig and an ill-fitting blue silk dress that hung low over her bony shoulders, and answering to the name Svetlana. She smiled wanly at my grandmother, who rushed to embrace her. This is she, said my grandmother. This is my Bella. Ah, said the madam, if you'd only said you were looking for Svetlana. I want to take her home with me. There has been a terrible mistake, said the madam. I'm afraid that can't be done. I've quite a bit of money invested in this girl. She doesn't look it, but she could be a gold mine over time. What will it cost me? This one is almost priceless, said the madam. Don't be deceived by her ugliness. She's very popular with the men. The soldiers love her. That big mouth of hers could suck a regiment dry. Still, I have a heart. I know about family. 500 kopecks to buy her out of a... I don't have that kind of money. My grandmother, I will write you a note. I swear I will honor the debt, but you want, says the man. She wants, they want, everybody wants. I want my own fancy brothel in Moscow, a palace where aristocrats, hussars, and guardsmen visit. I want it filled with Austrian crystal chandeliers and fine porcelain figurine. Look at this shepherdess, she said as she pointed to this small, elegant 18th century figurine safely entombed in a glass dome. The finest Meissen. Took me a year to pay for this, and it's likely I will never have another like her. No, shouted the madam, this girl has been sold to me with a written contract signed by her guardian. Cash has traded hands, and unless you can repay me with interest, she stays and you go. My grandmother looked around the room. She surveyed the 6 sturdy-looking prostitutes who occupied it. She saw the terror and the pleading in Bella's eyes. My grandmother knew only one thing as a certainty. She could not leave her dead brother Abram's child in this place. Her decision was sudden, strategic, and powerful. She lifted her cane and brought its ivory handle down with a terrible force on the glass dome that contained the Meissen figurine, shattering it. Exploding shards of glass and porcelain flew about the room. No anarchist's bomb blasting in a crystal palace could have caused such devastation. With another stroke, she swept the other figurines off the table as she followed through her deadly rampage, killing the figurines that had landed on the floor with that stout stick as if she was stamping out so many insects. Nothing my grandmother might have done could have been this extreme, this terrible to the woman. Anna Volotnikov knelt down. She started to pick up the precious shepherdess, weeping and keening like a mother who had just seen her child run down by a speeding carriage. I am sorry, said Grandmother Sarah, that I destroyed your prized possession, but you failed to listen to me, and you refuse to understand that I am a serious woman. Bella is mine. She is as dear to me as those China tchotchkes were to you. This is just the beginning. If I am forced to leave without her, it will be the worse for you. As Cousin Bella told the story to me many years later, the madam took Bella by the shoulders, tossed her roughly into the arms of my grandmother, nearly throwing them both to the ground, and ripping the red wig from Bella's head. Practical, despite her rage, she figured it would serve another girl later. Go! Get out! Go! She screamed at my grandmother and Bella. They never looked back. Now, Bella had been living with my grandmother Sarah for a year, working as a seamstress and apprentice upholsterer in my grandmother's small upholstery business when Max appeared. Max had been a draftee fighting in the Caucasus and had come home bearing a bullet hole in his shoulder and a letter of commendation from his commander. Max Cholupsky, although a Jew, is one of the bravest men I have ever had in my command. But Max found no practical use for a letter. What good was bravery in a world that valued skills? He needed a job, and he was determined to immigrate as soon as he had money to leave for Hamburg, where he would book a passage to America. The new century had begun, and he did not want to waste another year of his life in this hopeless, benighted Russia. When Max entered the upholstery shop, the last person he expected to see was Svetlana. The whore whom he had favored on his trips to the brothel while on leave for the army. He always asked for her. He found her quiet, soft, and comforting, and when Max went to embrace Svetlana, my grandmother rose and put herself between them. My dear lady, Max said to my grandmother, Svetlana and I are old friends from the past. If you know her from the past, then you don't know her. She is a new person. God and I have given her a new life, and you must not assume that she will do now for free what she was forced to do as a slave. Max claimed that he was looking for a job in the small furniture factory that my grandmother had started in her home. He too had come out of hell, the hell of men dying in meaningless battle, and he wanted a new life. Nothing that Bella had done could compare to what he had done in the eye of God. They could both start anew. So it was then that my grandmother offered Max Bella's hand in marriage in exchange for employment. She would call his bluff. All that past is past stuff. It was marry her or leave now. So a wedding was hastily arranged. The marriage was recorded. There was no honeymoon, not even a party celebrating the union. Bella and Max worked in the upholstery shop for a year, saving for their passage to America. Arriving in America, Max landed a job as a salesman in a furniture showroom on Essex Street, which offered one free upholstered side chair and footstool with every sofa ordered. Bella continued to make slipcovers. Furniture once purchased was meant to last a lifetime, thus the need for slipcovers. Everything had to be covered. The Shalupskis did not starve, but they didn't prosper. They lived out their long lives on Rivington Street on the Lower East Side. Food was always on the table, obligations were always met, and the past was well behind them. If anyone could recognize Bella Shalupsky as Svetlana, the whore of Anna Bolotnikov's Minsk brothel, they never dared to show it, for Max was a large, strong man, and Grandmother Sarah, Bella's guardian, was someone you didn't wish to offend. Cousin Bella guarded her own secret, not so much for herself, but for her beloved Max. The world would say that he had been hoodwinked and he would be mocked, but they would never know. Her secret was protected by her ugliness. The marriage was a happy one. Max and Bella delighted in each other. He was a man of few words, and she was a woman of many, none of them comprehensible to the English-speaking world. He had mastered enough English to work in the store, and she had attended night school to try to learn the new language. If there was any shadow over the marriage, it was Bella's failure to have children. They tried, but it wasn't meant to be. She went to the local synagogue and prayed for a child. She consulted a rabbi, a doctor, a midwife. She even ventured uptown to St. Patrick's Cathedral, lit a candle before an image of the Virgin. She wasn't one to refuse help from anyone with a reputation for answering prayers. But she never became pregnant. She wondered if perhaps something had happened to her womb in the brothel that had kept her from conceiving a child. There was little she could do about her maternal longing until the arrival of baby Rivka. Now, the Shalupskis supplemented their meager income by renting out a spare room to transient immigrants. And one day, a dark, pretty young woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Goldie Shapiro took the room for a month for herself and her infant daughter, Rivka. She'd come from Poland in search of a husband who'd come to America a year before, leaving her to face the birth of her daughter, Rivka, alone in Europe. First, there were letters from various addresses on the Lower East Side, and then none. Finally, a letter arrived from a female relative in San Francisco claiming that she had seen the errant husband, Saul Shapiro, moving a pushcart along Grand Avenue. It was Goldie's hope that she could find the feckless soul in San Francisco, but the expense, the logistics of booking a passage from Poland to the west coast of America and a baby in her arms had been too much for her. Better that first she came east and worked till she could pay for the train fare to San Francisco, and so she found employment running a knitting machine in a sweater factory, leaving baby Rivka in the care of cousin Bella. Bella came to love the child fiercely and dreaded the day when Goldie Shapiro would depart for San Francisco on her desperate hunt for the husband. Goldie had been obliged to work for 6 months to save enough for the train fare and a month's living in San Francisco, and when Goldie came to say goodbye, Bella faced the woman stoically. During Goldie's long working hours, she hadn't discouraged the infant Rivka from calling her Mama. Bella feared that God had punished her for her wickedness, for what could be as dreadful as coveting and stealing the love of another woman's child. But, to Bella's astonishment, Goldie pleaded for more help. "I know," she said, "it's a terrible thing to ask of you, but I must, for the baby's sake and for mine. If I take the child with me to San Francisco, she might become ill on the long journey. I'd have no place to keep her. As I searched San Francisco for her father, would you keep Rivka here for me? I write to you every week about my progress, and you will write to me telling me all about the baby." And so Goldie departed, leaving Bella with the child. My grandmother warned her against this arrangement. "There's only heartbreak in this for you." Max also warned his wife, but Bella assured him that if the child were taken from her tomorrow, she would go on with life. "I have survived worse than you could ever know." Every day that passed, she faced a fear of what might arrive in the mail. But Goldie Shapiro, after sending a few postcards from San Francisco, stopped writing altogether. On the day when Rivka was 1 year old, Bella renamed her Pauline, after the perils of Pauline, which she'd seen in the Nickelodeon. At 6, Pauline was as beautiful a child as had been entered into the Rivington Street Grammar School. She knew so much for a small, pretty child, but there was one fact she did not know, and would not know for years to come. She did not know that Bella was not her mother, and that Max was not her father. 6 days before Pauline's 7th birthday, suddenly a letter arrived from San Francisco. It was the dreaded letter from Goldie Shapiro. "My dear Bella, how do I start? Where do I start? When I left for San Francisco, I had promised, indeed I had meant to write to you weekly, but I fell ill upon arriving in this city, and what strength I had was spent on the search for my Saul Shapiro. Before I knew it, a few years had passed. I had written to you. One day I decided to visit the Great World's Fair here, and it was at that fair that I came upon Saul and his pushcart. He claimed he tried to find me and failed. He never gave up hope that someday we would be together again. I told him of my hunt for him and of our child Rivka, who was living with a distant relative in New York. He said he longed to see the child, but there was no way we could afford to reclaim her at this time. If she was well cared for, we could do that later. For now, we will start our new life in the West." Within a year, we had a son, Grover Cleveland Shapiro. And life became very good for us. And now, at long last, we are ready to reclaim our own dear Rivka. The $300 I send you enclosed should help cover the costs you have had. Can you please send me a photograph? I would like to know what she looks like before I come for her next month. God bless you for your kindness to a lost woman and her child, Goldie Shapiro. Bella did not consider showing the letter to Max. She knew she could not outlive the loss of Pauline. How convenient of this awful Goldie and the slippery Saul to leave the child in her care so that they could work their shop and prosper. They didn't love this child. She was lost property, a misplaced hat, a glove, not a person to them. And now they come for her as proprietors and claimants, not as parents. She went ahead and wrote, "My dear Goldie, I was happy to hear from you at long last. I had given you up for dead. But I must reply to your letter with a heavy heart. 5 years ago, our darling Rivka took ill with the diphtheria and died. I will send a picture of her who needs such grief, but I am enclosing one of her headstone in the Jewish Workers' Circle Cemetery where she rests in peace. I'm keeping your money, which will cover what I was forced to spend for the gravestone. With great sadness and condolences from your friend Bella Shilowski." Now, Bella knew that the letter alone might not do the work for her, so she rushed to a stone cutter, offered him double his fees, had a small headstone carved within a few hours, and Rivka's name, date of birth, and death chiseled in it, with a short Hebrew prayer beneath it, "The Lord giveth and the Lord hath taken away." For $5 more, she bought a beautiful funeral wreath. For another $10, the stone cutter took her in his horse-drawn delivery cart to Central Park, where she placed the small gravestone upright, supported by some unseen rocks, laid the wreath at its foot, and using Max's Brownie camera, took a roll of film of the gravesite. Within 24 hours, the letter with the photograph of the gravesite was mailed to San Francisco. A mournful letter came back from Goldie thanking Bella for her care of the late unfortunate child, the darling, short-lived Rivka. She insisted that Bella keep the money and said that she would communicate with her no further. It must almost be as painful to Bella, who had raised this child like a mother, as it was to Goldie herself, the grieving mother who would never have the joy of raising that child. And so 20 years passes without any stranger discovering Bella's guilty secret. Pauline is now 22 and working as a secretary bookkeeper at a very important lawyer's office. She had grown into a tall, easygoing, cheerful young woman. Some people commented that there was no resemblance between her and the iron-haired, plain-faced Bella, but they did notice a resemblance to Max, who still displayed his good-looking regular features and his work-worn face. Now, despite the fact that she was now earning a good living, Pauline had not left the family apartment on Rivington Street to strike out on her own. She loved her parents and knew that leaving them before marriage was out of the question. It was while Pauline was at work uptown and Bella was at home that 21-year-old Grover Cleveland Shapiro knocked at Cousin Bella's door. He was a good-looking, gentle, well-spoken man whose voice was that of the new America, a voice without accent, without foreign roots. Bella knew at once who he was and where he had come from. He asked if she remembered his late mother, Goldie Miss Shapiro. After his mother's death, he had discovered an envelope addressed to his mother with the return address of a Bella Shalupski on Rivington Street. If she had written to his mother, surely she must have known her. Bella had dreaded this day, but she was prepared. I had so many boarders here, it's hard to tell. One from another, Shapiro, Goldie. There was a Goldie, no, that was a Gertrude. Gertrude Fuchs, who lived here one summer for a few days, perhaps a week. No. No Goldie that I can recall. No, not familiar. Why, are you looking for people who knew her? Well, as he sipped his glass of tea, he explained that his mother had died 13 years before, and his father had died shortly thereafter. He was all of 7 years old when he was placed in the St. Francis Catholic Boys Orphanage. There was no Jewish orphanage in San Francisco at the time, so he was given over to the only institution that would take him. He stayed in the orphanage until he was 16, when he was released with a letter recommending him as a boy of impeccable character and good habits. Although he had been baptized and had even served as an altar boy, he never forgot his Jewish family and his Jewish roots. 2 years at San Francisco School of Industrial Technology had given him a degree as a draftsman in engineering and architectural rendering, and he had then worked as an assistant to an engineer. He felt, however, disconnected, discontented, lonely, a shy man without real friends and family. So it was then that he decided to come east to try to track down his mother's friends, people who might have known her while she was living on Rivington Street. He knew it was Rivington Street because she had mentioned it to him once, and there was this envelope addressed to his mother with Bella's name and address on the back flap. He was an only child. Apparently there had been a sister he had never known. His mother spoke of her dying young. Later, Bella conceded that if only she had spoken up then, she might have averted all that was to follow. She told him that this was an impossible quest he was on. He might as well go back to Belarus, Russia, Poland, wherever his mother had come from, in order to find a lost family. She offered to hold on to the photograph of the dead Goldie and show it around the neighborhood for him, if that would help. Grover Cleveland thanked Cousin Bella for her offer, but decided that he would bring his mother's photograph with him as he canvassed the neighborhood for someone who might remember. In the past few years, there had been a great migration from Rivington Street, but Bella and Max had stayed on, finding no lure in the Flatbush of Brooklyn or the Tremont Avenue of the Bronx. Subways, the elevated tracks could carry you back and forth into the city where you worked, reading the Daily Mirror on your cane-cushioned seats, and take you back home to a new apartment with a private bathroom and a strip of hedges. Who needs a strip of hedges? On trees, you go back to Russia. Forests are thick and verdant there. Who needs nature? Nature. Nature's for the goyim. Nature's for fools. She found safety and comfort in these familiar, narrow-soiled streets, and she would never leave them. Pauline had flourished here. That girl didn't need to join the snobbish young beauties of the Bronx, meet some hoity-toity friend to unsettle her girls homespun views, here Bella knew all the dangers that might face her child, a sly shopkeeper who might offer a young girl a new dress in exchange for helping her put it on, men who would push their bodies against the young girls in the crowded streets and subways. But who knew what dangers awaited those who made the reckless relocation to the outer boroughs? In Brooklyn, elevated trains could derail and topple over onto the streets, killing their passengers and innocent pedestrians below. Bella had seen the pictures. Murdered bodies were discovered daily on empty lots in the Bronx. Chaos reigned in the sparsely settled outer boroughs, while order could be found on Rivington Street. Yes, Pauline had grown up strong and beautiful and safe. And she would someday meet a young lawyer at the office who would love her at once, shyly court her, end up by producing an engagement ring. They would marry, they would have 2 children, and the life would run according to the arcane, hidden rules of happiness which Bella had never mastered, but which existed for beautiful people like Pauline and her someday husband. But until then, Pauline was safe, satisfied that she was the only child of Max and Bella Shalupsky of Rivington Street. Now, the only question that Pauline had about her past had to do with her place of birth. Don't tell me I was born in Russia or Poland, she once queried, fearful that she could be thought of as a greenhorn. No, Bella replied. You are 100% American, born here 1 year after your father and I settled onto Rivington Street. When grandmother Sarah died, Bella had felt both grief and relief. The last, the only witness to the past, aside from Max, was now in her grave. The secret of Pauline's birth had died with Bella's savior. Bella had been very careful. A birth certificate had been forged for a home birth for a Pauline Shalupsky years ago, shortly after she purchased the gravestone and sent the picture out west. Pauline's certificate of excellence from the secretarial school was all she needed to get her safely through this life. It was one of those rare days when Bella was out of the flat cutting a slipcover in the Bronx that Grover Cleveland Shapiro knocked on the Shalupsky door again. Alone among all the dozens he had queried, he had found a peddler named Ben Berkowitz who had recalled his mother's face from the photograph and told him that the woman was most definitely a boarder with the Shalupskys. Grover returned to the Shalupsky flat later that afternoon to press Bella to remember more about the woman in the picture. But once he saw Pauline, the interest in his parentage seemed secondary to his admiration for this beautiful young woman. Pauline looked at him and saw not only the best-looking young man she'd ever seen, but also a man who needed help. Now, the nature of that help was difficult to determine, but it didn't matter. She would provide it. Bella returned to Rivington Street to find the young man and Pauline going over the photographic scrapbook that Max had kept of Pauline's childhood. Bella went over to him and slammed the book shut, hard on his fingers. What are you doing back here? She demanded. I have nothing more to say to you. I told you that I do not know your mother. Who knows if such a woman ever existed? Perhaps you're some kind of a criminal trickster who gets into people's homes with this cock and bull story of a missing mother. You like going to strangers? Go sell encyclopedias. And you, young lady, I thought I raised you better than to invite young men into our home without a chaperone. Who knows what he is? Certainly a stranger, possibly a thief, a rapist, an assassin. And you open the door for this one? I thought you were smarter than that. You shame me with this stupidity. Well, Pauline began to cry. The young man stepped forward to apologize for the intrusion. He explained that he'd come back only after speaking with the peddler who claimed that his mother had indeed lived in the Shalupsky apartment some 20 years before. Would Bella just concentrate? Perhaps think harder about this one. Ah, yes! Now I remember her, says Bella. She came, yes, with references from the Tsarina of Russia. She claimed to be Crown Princess Anastasia. So you, my boy, you must be heir to the throne of Russia. Now get up. Don't come back here. If you do, I will call upon some friends to see to it that you do not bother me and my family again. Pauline and Grover would never again meet on Rivington Street. The platforms of the elevated trains along 3rd Avenue, the city parks, a coffee shop, Times Square, where they could get lost, and the crowds would serve as safe places for their rendezvous. Within a month, hands had been held, kisses had been exchanged, vows made, and Pauline assured him that Bella and Max would come around and accept him as soon as they saw him as a steady worker and a serious suitor. Bella discovered no sign of these meetings. Pauline seemed cheerful, obedient, the old Pauline. One day, Bella asked Pauline if she'd run into that crazy Grover Cleveland boy. Pauline shook her head and answered, you think he would come back here after the way you treated him? It was the first lie that Pauline had ever told her mother, but she felt no guilt. Her mother was ignorant. She had the immigrant's fear of strangers. She loved her, but she felt no need to respect those old world superstitions. Grover Cleveland Shapiro found work as an architectural draftsman. The architects were impressed by his sure, clear renderings. His boss had called him a young prince of the pencil. Architecture was not then a trade that was open to Jews, but they felt that no client would suspect that this fair-haired boy from the West was Jewish, and they took to calling him Mr. Sharp. Told his bosses that he had to make a certain sum of money because he planned to marry, and they settled on a salary that was higher than Grover Cleveland had ever earned before. It was now that Grover Cleveland presented her with a small diamond ring that he had purchased for $200 from Jake the jeweler. It was guarantee of I'll buy it back for twice what you paid if you find it cheaper. Came with every purchase. And so on the following Sunday, Pauline decided to present the fait accompli of the engagement to her parents. She'd covered her hand with a dishcloth as she helped with the serving, but as she sat down, she held up her finger and offered it to them to admire. When? Who? Bella asked. When? This week. Who? Grover Cleveland Shapiro, the young man who came around looking for his mother. We've been seeing each other. I know, Mama, you don't like him, but he has a wonderful job, and we love each other, and once you get to know him as you cannot! Why not? Because he took some crazy dislike for, trust me, he could be the best man in the world, you still cannot marry him. Why, you think he's a goy? I'm marrying out of the faith. He's as Jewish as any man on Rivington Street. He hasn't had a bris. How would you know that? Trust me. I do. Pauline replied, unwilling to deny any part of the intimacy that had developed between her and Grover Cleveland. Aye, then this is worse than I feared, said Bella. She kept silent for a moment, pondering the way she might announce the fact and cause the least injury to her beloved daughter. She knew that there was no good way, but only one way, and so she took it. Pauline, Miss Grover Cleveland Shapiro, he's your brother. And then Bella told her about Goldie Shapiro and what she, Bella, had done to conceal the facts of Pauline's birth. I don't believe you. You do anything to keep us from marrying. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry that this gives you such grief, but my entire happiness depends upon my marrying Grover Cleveland Shapiro. Max, says Bella, tell her. It's the truth, Max said softly. Marry this man, and you commit a crime against God's law and man's nature will not suffer this. Oh, you'd say anything. You'd say anything to back her up. If he had an older sister, don't you think he would know about it? His mother would have said something about her? No, said Bella, not if this woman believed that the child had died. I even had a gravestone carved with your birth name on it and sent her a picture. Pauline, we loved you so much. There was nothing we wouldn't do. And so, Pauline returned to Grover Cleveland's room and told him that her parents were so far gone into madness that there was no chance that they would approve of this marriage. The following day, they went to the city hall. They were married by a clerk of the civil court. Pauline wore a rose-colored woolen suit and a rose straw hat purchased at Macy's little shop. And Grover Cleveland was handsome in his new dark blue serge suit. The bar mitzvah suit I never had, he jested. And so they became Mr. and Mrs. Grover Cleveland Sharp. It has never been very clear as to how the story became public. Pauline was pregnant. Bella had gone into deep mourning. A local rabbi came to visit her. Max had worried about the health of his wife, who had taken to her bed and would speak with nobody about her troubles. The rabbi heard the story and told Bella that she must report this to the civil authorities, which Bella refused to do. A troubled rabbi reported the news to his new wife, whose eldest son, a newspaper reporter, checked the public records at Ellis Island and found the document that showed that a Goldie Shapiro had immigrated to America in 1902, together with a 6-month-old child, a daughter. And then he phoned the San Francisco Hall of Records and discovered a registered birth in 1904 of Grover Cleveland Shapiro to this same Goldie Shapiro. The reporter tracked the newlyweds to their 4th-floor room in the West 80s. He also discovered that Pauline had visited a settlement house where she had been given prenatal advice. What kind of monster will spring from this tragedy? The paper queried in a headline. Never in the history of that paper had its readers sent in so much mail. At least half the correspondents blamed the tragedy on the lies of Bella Shalupsky, a woman who had tricked a poor lost woman out of her child. Others pointed to the degraded morals of immigrant women who dropped their newborns like so many unwanted kittens on strangers' doorsteps. Soon all the local and national papers got wind of the story. The moralists and the reformers amongst them, and there were many, wrote that this could not have happened if sanitary conditions in the ghetto had been improved, something we have been demanding for years. How could society expect morals from people who live in such filth and squalor? Grover Cleveland's architectural firm offered him a leave of absence to straighten out his affairs and advised him that he would only be welcomed back once he had taken the proper step of an annulment based upon the deception. Pauline and Grover Cleveland Sharp obtained their annulment. The child was born normal in all ways, a reproof to the doctors and the moralists who predicted multiple heads and club feet and 14 fingers and a spectacular hair lip. Shortly after his birth, Pauline advised the Shalupskys that she could not, would not, raise such a child. Without a moment's hesitation, Cousin Bella took the baby as her own. And Seymour Shalupsky, as he was later called, grew into a bright, lively child, devoted to the self-proclaimed grandparents who raised him. Pauline moved to Chicago, and Grover Cleveland left for the far west, never to be heard from again. 5 years later, Bella received a postcard from Pauline in Detroit. She stated that she had remarried, had a new family of her own. There was not a word asking about Seymour or Grover Cleveland, only the hope that Max and Bella were well. She signed it with her birth name, Rivka. More important and more terrible for Bella, there was no return address. Just as well, Bella told Max, from now on, I am Seymour Shalupsky's mother.
The true wonder of it was that no one, during Bella and Max's long lifetime, ever told Seymour Shapiro, now Shalupsky, the origins of his birth. In fact, Cousin Bella told me that he went to his death at age 40 of a neuromuscular disorder, still believing that Bella and Max were his parents. It had been noted by Max that the rabbi had died shortly thereafter of a horrid skin cancer that ate his face after revealing Bella's secret to his reporter's son. The reporter was killed in a subway derailment a few months later, or so Bella told me. It was clear to her that a sleeping God had finally awakened to punish anyone who tried to exploit her tragedy. Sorrow must be respected, so Cousin Bella told me. No man should profit from it. And as far as I knew, no man ever did.